Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this little video that I found to be very particularly interesting. And this is going to be a video, I believe, by that of Dante's Boxing Nation. And this video that I'm about to do right here, it's actually going to be followed by another video that I'm going to review, I believe, by John Boxing Pound for Pound the Best. Because Dante's Boxing Nation, I always commentate a lot on his channel because even though I think that Dante's Boxing Nation, I think that a lot of the times that he can mean well with his commentary, especially when he, tries to talk about, racial double standards, especially that black fighters or black athletes have to go through, which I, to somewhat of a degree agree with. But it's just very interesting because Dante's Boxing Nation, of course, as we all know, he also makes a job and also makes a living off of degrading and trying to demean the accomplishments of certain non-black fighters such as Alexander Usyk or Canelo Alvarez, Naoya Inoue. And we know that whenever they are debated as the possible best fighter of the year, or even potentially as the number one pound for pound fighter, we know that there's always going to be a pushback from Dante's Boxing Nation. And what Dante's Boxing Nation always wants you to believe is that these fighters that, even though they may be talented, that the only reason why they're being pushed as the number one pound for pound guy is because they're not black, and that's their way of being racist and all that other stuff. And listen, to a degree, is there a lot of that out there by ESPN and other stuff? Yeah. Are there certain fighters that have been on the pound for pound list that have not deserved to have been on the pound for pound list, because they were non-black fighters and they were trying to, get more of a fan base in other places, or possibly trying to demean the dominance of black American fighters? Yeah, you certainly can say that. I'm not going to completely disagree with that. But the thing is that once again, with every spectrum, there also comes both sides of the extremism. And when you come to ESPN, and of course a certain amount of other fans, they may put energy into trying to demean certain black champions or black fighters, while Dante's Boxing Nation, he puts a lot of his energy into demeaning non-black fighters. And when you talk about the debatable number one pound for pound fighter in the world right now, you can talk about Terence Crawford, you can talk about Naoya Inoue, you can talk about Alexander Usyk, and I think that you still have a little bit of an outside argument for that of Mr. Canelo Alvarez. But the thing is that Dante's Boxing Nation is never going to admit that any of those fighters have a debate as the number one pound for pound guy, because Dante's Boxing Nation is way too focused on trying to settle a score with a lot of these racial fans. So that's why he's never going to be able to be reliable as a commentator. But of course, for those of you that have been around long enough for my channel and also watch Dante's Boxing Nation, you know that one of the fighters that, of course, that he always loves to demean is that of Mr. Solo Canelo Alvarez. And what we've heard from a lot of these channels, including Dante's Boxing Nation and Aki TV, and that of Boxing Eagle and a lot of these other guys, is that Canelo Alvarez, that he cannot be remembered as a quote-unquote all-time great Mexican fighter, that apparently he's not on the same level as Juan Manuel Marquez or Marco Antonio Barrera or Eric Morales or Oscar De La Hoya, that apparently he's not even on the same level as those Mexican or Mexican-American fighters, that he's not even close to an alleged all-time great fighter. But Dante's Boxing Nation is actually going to tell you how great he actually believes that Canelo Alvarez is. And I've known this overall for a very long time, like I stated. Certain people overall, they will truly tell you what they're actually trying to state or what they actually think, if you are keen enough and if you are sharp enough overall, once again, to truly dissect what they're actually trying to say. And Dante's Boxing Nation, once again, he's going to reveal that with Terence Crawford here, who recently just ended up winning Fighter of the Year, which I think was deserved because, of course, he ended up beating that of Errol Spence Jr. last year in very dominant fashion. But anyways, we're going to let Dante's Boxing Nation talk here. I thought that it was a very interesting take. Let's get into it.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So some pretty shocking news to report. Terence Crawford, he actually wins the 2024 SB Boxer of the Year award. The reason why this news is so surprising is because I did not expect ESPN to do the right thing and give it to the man who actually deserved it, which is the American fighter, Terence Crawford. Now, if any of you guys
Right, but Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, let's just be real here for a second. Is is Terence Bud Crawford really the 100% true deserved fighter of the year, or are you just saying that because he's a black American fighter and you wanted him to win the fighter of the year? And listen, don't get it twisted. I do believe that Terence Bud Crawford was very deserving, because I believe that this was, from the year last year of July, I think maybe to this year, or maybe it was I can't remember exactly what the date would have been. But Terence Crawford, in my view, either way, whoever you want to debate, he is very debatable in that conversation for quote unquote fighter of the year. Of course, he had a very dominant performance over a fighter that would have been within my personal top five pound for pound and many other people's top five pound for pound, if not potentially higher. So Terence Bud Crawford definitely deserved to win this award. If not unanimously, then at least certainly debatably. So I definitely do not have a problem with Terence Bud Crawford winning this award. But Dante's Boxing Nation always tries to make it seem like no other fighters, other than Terence Bud Crawford, even really deserve a mention, or that it's just completely racist or biased, really, to even mention it. Which once again goes on the level of extremism, but that's what Dante's Boxing Nation does because he also is completely racially motivated. And that's why he will never admit that there's a possibility that Usyk or Inoue or Canelo Alvarez could have been the number one pound for pound fighter. He's never going to do that. Any single time that one of those fighters is debated as the number one pound for pound fighter, even if they have a great debate, which every single one of those fighters does, or did, he's never going to admit that because he is just way too emotional and way too racially motivated.
are confused, saying to yourself, well, Terence Crawford, he didn't even fight this year. How did he win the award? Well, it's because ESPN, they're going from July of 2023 to July of 2024, which July is coincidentally the month that Terence Crawford fought Errol Spence and stopped him. With this win, Terence Crawford, he beats out Naoya Inoue and Alexander Usyk. Terence Crawford, he became the first male boxer to become a two-time undisputed champion, and he did it by beating another top 3 pound for pound champion at the time in Errol Spence.
Definitely one of the most impressive performances that I've ever seen in a super fight. And I know that a lot of people, of course, they claim that Errol Spence Jr. was not the same. I mean, he was off of a year layoff. I'll give you that. But in terms of the him completely being broken down and wore down mentally and all this sort of stuff, uh, you know, no, I'm sorry. I just don't. I'm not buying that. Errol Spence Jr. He had a very excellent knockout win over that of a Yordenis Ugas, a year prior, to the point to where a lot of people thought that Errol Spence Jr. was in top peak form. And I'm sorry, I'm just not going to go along with the narrative that Errol Spence Jr. was completely broken down. Now, if you want to say that he was rusty and maybe not in the most peak form because of the year layoff, I mean, you can maybe state that if you want to. But other than that, no, it was a great performance.
But not only did he beat him, he completely dominated Errol Spence. It was a flawless victory. Unlike the performances,
It definitely was. Once again, that was one of the biggest ass whoopings that I've personally ever seen. When you talk about a super fight that was just a complete domination from round one to to the last part, at least mainly, I can think of Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder, the rematch. I can think of Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr., the first fight around. Naoya Inoue versus Steve Cool Boy Fulton. And there might be some other ones that personally I'm not thinking of. Maybe Lomachenko versus Guillermo Rigondeaux. That one wasn't quite as extreme, but that's because Rigondeaux was not engaging whatsoever. I mean, those are pretty much the fights that I can remember, at least during my lifetime growing up watching the sport of boxing. To where, to where overall they were just major ass kickings, weren't really even competitive whatsoever.
that Alexander Usyk and the
But this one was even worse because literally, because literally every punch that Terence Bud Crawford was landing on Errol Spence Jr., like you could literally feel it through the TV screen. Every punch was just thudding on Errol Spence Jr.'s face. Like that dude, that guy got his ass whooped in that fight.
Inoue had. Truth be told, Terence Crawford, he should.
And let me rewind that there.
But not only did he beat him, he completely dominated Errol Spence. It was a flawless victory, unlike the performances that Alexander Usyk and Naoya Inoue had. Truth be told, Terence...
Well, right, but Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, if we're also going to really to really talk about that, let's put a little bit of context behind this situation. And this is also another thing that annoys me about Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation with his commentary, and a part of the reason why I like to tune in. Dante's Boxing Nation is extremely disingenuous with his commentary, and he will leave out certain information or leave out certain facts when he wants to. First of all, when you talk about Mr. Naoya Inoue was just as dominant as Mr. Terence Bud Crawford in his super fight performance against that of a Stephen Coolboy Fulton. So that really wouldn't make any sense. And secondly, when it comes down to it overall, when you talk about Mr. Alexander Usyk, yes, you can state overall that he was not quite as dominant in his performances against both AJ Anthony Joshua and that of a Tyson Fury. But at the end of the day, are we really going to go there? Because not only were both of those fighters A-grade level fighters and also debatably top 10 pound-for-pound level fighters, at least debatably, in my book, certainly Tyson Fury would have been, in my personal view, at least in my top 10 pound-for-pound. Alexander Usyk was able to beat a guy that was 20 pounds heavier than him and AJ Anthony Joshua, and he was able to defeat a guy that was 30 pounds heavier than him in that of a Tyson the Gypsy King Fury, and a guy that outlengthened him by several inches. So at the end of the day, Alexander Usyk's name should be up there as a debatable number one pound-for-pound fighter. But it's very interesting because for many of these channels that claim to be so truthful and logical and objective, when it comes down to it, and don't get it twisted, they're not the only demographic of channels that, play this racial bullshit. Because a lot of people are going to say that, what's the problem? They're just doing overall what other guys are doing. Right, but then don't call yourself an objective or a logical commentator. Just don't overall, pee on my leg and tell me it's raining. Don't try to bullshit me overall and sit here and try to say how logical of a commentator you are when really you're just trying to settle an emotional racial score. It is what it is. But anyways, listen to what Dante's Boxing Nation is going to say about Canelo here very soon.
Crawford, he should have won the Best Championship Performance Award as well. And I think the reason why they didn't give him that award is because boxing is not as popular as a lot of the other national sports. Now, once again, I told you guys that I was really surprised that ESPN did what they were supposed to do. Because when you think about it, this fight, Terence Crawford versus Errol Spence, it was the biggest fight since Mayweather versus Pacquiao. And do you guys know what...
Well, I mean, it was supposed to be the biggest fight ever since Mayweather versus Pacquiao. But the most recent fight that was very big, that was bigger than the Terence Bud Crawford versus Errol Spence Jr. fight, was that overall of the Gervonta Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia fight, because of course that fight did 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. Now, when you want to say that this was on paper, was the quote-unquote fight of the decade because it was the fight that everyone was calling for a very long time, you can state that. It certainly was. And Terence Bud Crawford handled business. He did a very, very great job. And ever since that performance, that, in my view, pretty much, of course, had to be his magnum opus. That pretty much had to be his Mona Lisa. His main piece of art to where everyone's going to remember. Because I don't care how many pro-blackity-black channels or how many overall racially motivated channels have to say about Terence Bud Crawford, or how many fans of Terence Bud Crawford there are out there. Listen, at the end of the day, the man is an all-time great fighter. But if the man had never defeated Errol Spence Jr. and had just retired by defeating the names that he had did with Yuriorkis Gamboa and Sean Porter and Victor Postal, no one would ever have him in the conversations as a debatable top 20 to top 10 fighter of all time. Nobody. It is what it is. The man had to defeat that of Errol Spence Jr. And listen, at the end of the day, every fighter needs to be in the ring against a fighter that really looks like their counterpart. For Canelo Alvarez, it was Gennady Golovkin. When you talk about, for that of Alexander Usyk, it was Tyson Fury, at least eventually. When you talk about that of Terence Crawford, it was Errol Spence Jr. In a way, so far, it was that of Stephen Coolboy Fulton. And, later on, more than likely going to be Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez. Terence Bud Crawford really had never had a fighter like that. He had never fought someone that was in the top 10 pound per pound. He really had never fought someone that probably would have been in the top 20 pound per pound. I mean, maybe you can say Yuriorkis Gamboa, but Gamboa also was probably about a couple weight classes smaller, really, than what he should have been at the 135-pound weight class. So it just is what it is. So Terence Crawford finally ended up getting his major performance over Errol Spence Jr., and that's exactly what he needed. Because once again, had he not got that victory, Terence Bud Crawford would have not been remembered as an all-time great fighter. And at the end of the day, he is a great fighter. He's always had all-time great talent and all-time great skill. He's an amazing level fighter, but you have to have the resume.
ESPN did after Floyd Mayweather beat Manny Pacquiao.
And the thing is about many of these Dante's Boxing Nations and Boxing Egos and Aki TV channels, they love to bitch, moan, and complain about how biased ESPN is and some of these other channels are by putting Lomachenko and non-black fighters on a pound-for-pound list, even if they have decent results, like what a Lomachenko did when he was eventually being debated as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter. You cannot defeat guys overall like Nicholas Walters and Gary Russell Jr. and Guillermo Rigondeaux and Jorge Linares, be a three-weight division champion and as skilled as what he was, and not be in the debate, at least as a debatable #1 pound-for-pound fighter. What they tried to make it seem like was that it was completely racially motivated. Now, are there times where a non-black fighter is ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound guy and it might be racially motivated a little bit more? Yeah, sure, absolutely. But that was that was not one of those times. Now, do a lot of people probably rank certain non-black fighters as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter because of a racial motivation? Yes, absolutely. But let's just not sit here and pretend, for those of us that are avid boxing watchers and boxing aficionados, that Alexander Usyk or Inoue or Canelo don't deserve to be in the same conversation as a Terence Bud Crawford. At least when you talk about ranking, or even honestly debatable all-time great ranking. Because when you talk about an all-time great ranking, what really separates Alexander Usyk and Terence Bud Crawford really that much? Because if Alexander Usyk was a black American fighter, he probably would be ranked much higher by many of these LDBC and new media channels.
They gave the Fighter of the Year award to Ronda Rousey over Floyd Mayweather. And I think because of people like me and other people on the internet, ESPN, they received a lot of backlash from that. So I truly believe the evolution of social media has been...
That is one positive I think that Dante's Boxing Nation and some of the LDBC and new media has brought to the table, which is a little bit of a counterbalance, I think, overall to some of their biasness. The problem is that the problem is with the LDBC and new media is that basically they're pretty much just as much of a politician. They're pretty much just as disingenuous and just as fraudulent as a lot of these ranking systems out there as well.
And pressuring ESPN to do the right thing when it comes to these type of calls. So Crawford, he wins his second ESPY award, and now he's moving up to another weight class, and he has another very, very dangerous fight against Israel Madrimov. And I'm telling you guys right now, if he beats Madrimov, he's most likely going to get the Canelo Alvarez fight at 168. I mean, just him beating Madrimov alone, that already brings him closer to winning a third ESPY award. But of course...
Let's please stop the bullshit, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation. And this is why, once again, that I like to commentate on Dante's Boxing Nation, because Dante is so disingenuous. Once again, when it comes overall to the accomplishments of certain other fighters like Naoya Inoue, unifying that of the 122 pound weight class after defeating Stephon Fulton, all the man talked about was how Naoya Inoue was still going to have to accomplish more and do more challenges at 126 because that's what the all-time greats do. When Usyk defeated that at Tyson Fury, the man didn't even mention it. The man didn't say anything about it. But Terence Bud Crawford is about to fight a guy that has 11 total fights. 11 total fights. And just won the championship because of a vacant title. Because all the titles are recently vacant there. And the man is trying to make it seem like Israel Madrimov is the next Gennady Golovkin. Spare me the fucking bullshit, please.
If he then beats him and then moves up to one.
And don't get it twisted, that is not me stating that Israel Madrimov will not be a decent opponent, maybe even debatably somewhere along the A grade level. But let's please stop pretending like this man overall is like the Gennady Golovkin. Gennady Golovkin was a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter when Canelo Alvarez was able to defeat him at one given moment in time. A highly skilled professional and a highly skilled amateur. We really don't know how great Israel Madrimov is, because he's never really been in the ring against any clear A-grade level fighters. So let's please stop.
68 and beats Canelo Alvarez, then we have to start talking about the greatest of all time. Who really is TBE? Is it Crawford or is it Floyd Mayweather? Because Terence Crawford is inching closer and closer to TBE status. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
A lot of y'all.
It's very interesting what Dante's Boxing Nation just stated there. Did you hear what he stated? He stated that if Terence Bud Crawford is able to defeat Canelo Alvarez at 168 pounds, that Crawford then has to be in the conversation as TBE. And in my opinion, if he does do that, then yes, he will very well be likely in that conversation, because I consider Canelo Alvarez a high level fighter, even at this point in time in his career where he's slowing down a little bit. I think that Canelo Alvarez is a clear all time great fighter. But it's just very interesting because what Dante's Boxing Nation will always try to tell you, and what these channels will always try to tell you, is that Canelo Alvarez, that he's not even above Barrera, he's not even above Eric Morales. You know, guys that did not win a lot of the biggest fights in their career. Lost to Manny Pacquiao and lost to some other guys. But Canelo, who's pretty much won the majority of the biggest fights of his career, at least guys that were similar in size or maybe slightly bigger than him, he can't be remembered as greater than those guys. But if Crawford defeats Canelo Alvarez, someone who's 5'7" with a 71-inch arm reach, and remember, a guy who's just an average Mexican fighter, a guy who's not as great as those guys, a guy who's not an all-time great level fighter, this is what Dante has stated. If Crawford defeats him, he's going to be the greatest of all time. So something is not adding up in terms of the quote-unquote definition or the quote-unquote value of a champion that Dante's Boxing Nation is giving that to Canelo Alvarez. But I've been stating this for years. Dante's Boxing Nation doesn't truly believe that Canelo Alvarez is less greater than Barrera or Morales. He doesn't believe that shit. He'll tell you that overall because he wants you to believe that shit, and he tries to convince you of that, but Dante doesn't believe that. But it's just very interesting, once again, how there is no talk about an Alexander Usyk, who recently defeated Tyson Fury. I bet you money that if you were to talk about Alexander Usyk being above certain guys like Evander Holyfield, or even in the debates of some other all-time great heavyweight fighters, that Dante's Boxing Nation would be very reluctant to have that conversation. But Terence Bud Crawford, he has, to be quite honest with you, he really only has a very select few amount of A-grade level wins in his career. Not stating that Alexander Usyk has a dozen, but at the end of the day, Crawford and Usyk, when you really talk about those guys, I wouldn't really claim that either of those guys have over 10 A-grade wins in their career. I think Alexander Usyk has a few, and I think that Terence Bud Crawford, to be honest with you, I think that he has really about 4 at most, and even that is a debate. I would give him Sean Porter, and I would give him Errol Spence Jr. I'll also give him Gamboa, even though, yes, I do think Gamboa was smaller, but I'll still give him A grade, and I'll give him A grade for Victor Postal. But other than that, he just does not have a whole lot of other A grade level names on his resume. It just is what it is. But Crawford is already put in the top 5, the top 10 rankings of all time according to these guys. Isn't that very interesting? So it is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it. Once again, Dante once again reveals his true thoughts on Canelo Alvarez, which is that Canelo is an all-time great fighter. Because Terence Bud Crawford, if he was going to go up to 168 and defeat another fighter, even a champion, like that of a John Ryder or something like that, if John Ryder was champion or someone else like that, or if Crawford was able to beat that of Janibek, let's say, for example, people want to be in the discussion of Crawford being as an all-time great fighter. The reason, or excuse me, not the greatest ever. The reason why he stated that is because he truly knows who Canelo Alvarez is, who's an all-time great fighter. And I've been stating that for a very long time. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for this video. And this video is going to be followed up by a John Boxing Pound for Pound the Best video that I also find very interesting. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. But yes, when you talk about all-time great fighters for this generation, you're not just talking about Crawford. You're also talking about Canelo. You're talking about Alexander Usyk. And you're talking about some others as well. We'll see where Fury goes. He might be remembered in terms of the all-time great conversation as well if he can avenge his loss at least once against Alexander Usyk. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see about that one. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later. And of course, we'll also see where Mr. Naoya Inoue goes as well. I'm going to need to see a little bit more work from him. But he, of course, also already could be within the all-time great conversation as well. Certainly a first ballot Hall of Famer. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll talk to y'all later.